Good morning, and welcome to day 34 of F260 at First Baptist Meridian. Today we look at Exodus chapters 13 and 14, the aftermath of Passover. And again, yesterday we hit those four big P's. Passover was different from the plagues that came before it, and that the people prepared, the people participated, the people were to perpetuate the Passover, remember it every year, and after the Passover, they are sent out of Egypt with the plunders of the Egyptians. Today is the aftermath of that on two fronts. One, the perpetuation. Going back to chapter 4, when God is sending Moses to Pharaoh, in chapter 4:22, he says, "Tell Pharaoh that Israel is my firstborn." Right after that, Moses almost loses his firstborn son, Gershom, because he's not circumcised. He's essentially raised him more like an Egyptian than a Hebrew, because Hebrew males were supposed to be circumcised on the eighth day. Then the culmination of Pharaoh's pride and just doubling down against God's purposes is that all the Egyptians lose their firstborn, including Pharaoh. And so finally in chapter 13, we read that the firstborn sons and even the firstborn livestock are supposed to be consecrated to God. Initially, it seems like God intended that the firstborn from all Israelite families would have that priestly ministry in the tabernacle or later in the temple. And some things happen later, such as the golden calf incident, that shakes that up a little bit. And that role ends up going to the tribe of Levi, the Levites. But there's that strong emphasis on firstborn son that will again play out in the New Testament, as so many things do. The other thing I want to hit on is Exodus chapter 14. You would think after all the plagues, after the death of the firstborn in Egypt, that Pharaoh is done, but Pharaoh's heart is hardened. Pharaoh is a tangible demonstration that the cost of holding on to our sin is far greater than the perceived cost of letting it go. Even after all the miracles and wonders God has wrought upon the Egyptians, showing his power over Pharaoh's pride, Pharaoh cannot let this rest. So Pharaoh pursues the Israelites. And it's amazing, the Israelites, despite all that God has done for them, immediately doubt, why did God bring us out here to die? And so you have that wonderful verse in Exodus 14:14, where the people are told, the Lord himself will fight for you. And then you could translate the second part of that in one of two ways. Essentially, the Lord will only fight for you. You need only be still, as a word of comfort. Or you could interpret and translate it as a word of correction. The Lord himself will fight for you, so you need to be quiet. God delivers them by taking them through the waters. He parts, in Hebrew, Yam Suf, Sea of Reeds, usually associated with the Red Sea, but he parts the waters so the Israelite people can pass through on dry ground, and then Pharaoh and his armies have the waters wash over them. This is so interesting if you go back to like the covenant with Noah, when God promises he'll never destroy the world by flood again. After that time, water tends to be a symbol of redemption for God's people, and the Exodus is one of those examples. Also, if you punt to the New Testament and look at the ministry of Jesus, how does it begin? With the baptism of Jesus. In all four Gospels, though, we read about it less directly in the Gospel of John. But it's interesting in Matthew, Jesus says this somewhat puzzling statement when he comes to be baptized. He says, "This is necessary in order to fulfill all righteousness." And that puzzles a lot of Christians, because we know that Jesus wasn't a sinner, so why would it be necessary for Jesus to be baptized? Well, Jesus is enacting the story of God's people, and God's people are the people who pass through the waters. So always pay attention to the way that those Old Testament threads play out in the New Testament, the way that they reach realization in the gospel of Jesus Christ. So after this is, effectuating, realizing their freedom from Egypt, passing through the Sea of Reeds. And now the question will be, can the God who took them out of Egypt provide for them through the wilderness on the way to the promised land? And will this people, for whom God has done so much already, trust him to do what he says he will do as they move forward. That will be the dynamic tension moving forward in the story of Israel. So keep reading, keep reflecting, and keep responding to God's word. And in light of all he's done, live in trust for him today. God bless you. See you tomorrow.